Thank you, Chairman. It's nice to be back with all of you. After we concluded the report that we provided based on the interviews and the analysis that we had done in the early part of the year, I got a call from the chairman and the president asking specifically about one of the topics that I had spoken about when I was with you before and that we had mentioned in our report, and that was specifically around how the board spends its time and how the committees spend their time. And so I wanted to share with you, to start my remarks, a reminder of some of what we heard from you and from other stakeholders in the state about shifting your time to be more focused on strategic issues rather than more transactional and operational issues as a board. These are some of the summary comments that came back from the interviews that we conducted in the first quarter. Firstly, with regard to composition, many of the stakeholders that we spoke with, including many of the board members, connected the large size of the board with confusion and role clarity, a negative board dynamic, and slowness to make decisions. Now, obviously, the size of the board is not something that any of you have any control over, but you had comments about this when we interviewed you. The board meeting process is the next topic, and although 76% of you thought that the frequency of the board meetings was about right, there were a number of you that felt that the frequency was too great and inhibited your ability to focus on high-value work. 55% of the board members disagreed that you spend enough time on matters of key importance. And so as we dug into that more and more with the board members, it was clear that there was an appetite to spend more time on matters that you thought were most important, what President Spellings has described, majoring in the majors, and spending more time when you're gathered together on issues of strategy and less on issues of transaction and operation. The board members also felt that you were given too much pre-read material and too little time to digest it, and that was pretty consistent feedback that we received, and that there was a need to improve and align the agenda setting for the meetings with the priorities to focus on more strategic topics. With regard to committees and other subgroups, your feedback was basically that there are a lot of them, and there are 17 if you look at the number of standing committees, special committees, and working groups. That the number of committees also causes the agenda of some of the committees to be pretty narrow. And there was a thought that should be revisited over time and look at the committee structure to make sure that it continues to align with what you think are the most important topics. Another point that was raised is that there's important work that's done that requires other people beyond just the board to sit in on some of these committees, and specifically there was a sense that you didn't leverage the talent in the chancellors on some of these committees in the way that you should, and other experts. In terms of board education, 62% of the board members disagreed that there's adequate procedure for orienting new board members. And there was a feeling that board members don't always have the background that gives them the fullest perspective on public sector. And then lastly, with regard to boards of trustees, that the boards of trustees roles are highly variable, institution to institution, and that it's not always clear what role the Board of Trustees plays versus the role that the Board of Governors plays. And there was some feeling from members of this board that you would like to have more indication of support for key decisions that are being put forward by the individual institutions as those come forward. So that was just a summary of what we heard from y'all and other stakeholders. And so Chairman Bissett and President Spellings then asked me to think about, on the basis of our experience and best practice, what would some suggestions look like that we would make for how you deal with some of these things. And so the first suggestion is to take it in bites, and that in the first bite that you can elevate the strategic priorities that you've identified to enable you to major in the majors. Secondly, that if you can take the transactional activities and put them offline from the primary board setting, you can free up some time to make sure you're having dialogue and debate about the things that you care the most about. Thirdly, to align the board meetings with the most important issues and the priorities. And then fourthly, to establish clarity on which committees and task forces should be overseen by the board versus by the president. As an example, the task force that President Spellings mentioned on online, that's something that she's going to oversee as a management responsibility. These are, I mean, I wouldn't say these are particularly profound. I think hopefully they make good logical sense to y'all and common sense, but it's really how do you move to where you've all said you want to move. And so there's a second phase which you could take on once you get through aligning your agendas with your strategic priorities, and that could include how do you think about making sure the 17 committees that you have, do they continue to make sense as the right 17 committees? Should you realign those in some way? Do you need the same number of meetings that you've had historically, or can you adjust the meeting frequency? And then other best practices, which we can share examples of best practices from other places, and that may inform other changes that y'all would consider as well. Specifically, you've already launched one element here, which is to align your 5 strategic priorities with with 5 of your standing committees, and to double hat, if you will, the remit for those committees. And this is the lineup that you've come up with on that. And you've also made the decision that when these standing committees are taking on this second hat, that you would augment the committee structure to include some chancellors and to include other higher education experts as appropriate. That's a really important move as well, and I think also responsive to the feedback that was provided that you weren't leveraging fully, and you felt you weren't leveraging fully the talent that exists at the institutions. The Strategic Planning Committee, which will still exist through this process, has a very important coordinating role, and these were identified as key areas for the Strategic Planning Committee to cover. First of all, to coordinate the calendar across the whole process, and I believe President Spellings mentioned a master calendar has already been distributed to you. Secondly, to monitor the overall work plan and progress. And then thirdly, to establish a set of templates so that when these various committees bring their reports to this body, they're consistent, they follow a common cadence, and that you can be more efficient in the way that you interface with the committees. They would also have a synthesizing role where they would look across the work of the 5 strategic priorities and provide a synthesis for this body, and then monitor progress and make appropriate interventions. There are a number of considerations as you think about these strategic priority committees that we would recommend. First, start with a clear understanding of the current state activities and performance, both at an institution level and system-wide. What do you do today well? What's the state of play? What are the priorities? How will progress be assessed and reported? It's important to have a fact base that you all share in common before you begin to move toward solutions. And so the recommendation is to spend some time in these committees making sure that you understand the lay of the land and you understand the fact base. Whether it's about access or affordability, your ability to make decisions as a board is going to be much stronger if you have a strong fact base and a common fact base upon which to base those decisions. involve the chancellors as co-owners versus, historically what is felt, I think, to them and to many as a minor stakeholder role who are consulted for input. And I mean, this is the coal face in the state is at the institutional level. And there are great practices that already exist right here in this state, as we've discussed in previous meetings. And these chancellors really understand that and can add a lot of value to it. Once the current state is assessed, consider then, what you might do differently. What are the gaps to best practice, and what should you do differently to close those gaps? If you're not satisfied with where you stand on access, if you're not satisfied with where you stand on affordability, what are the gaps and what's the plan to close those? Those are very strategic conversations. They inform policy and are the kinds of conversations that you've said you have a greater appetite to have. The recommended cadence for the strategic priority committees would be that you would prepare a fact base prior to board engagement as much as possible to build that current state, to understand what's happening at a national and North Carolina level, to articulate the gaps, to identify a set of metrics and other draft targets, and to develop some draft actions to drive progress. Because of the way that you're getting into this, and because of the way that you've set up your cadence for your meetings, everybody's not going to be at the same place in their fact-based development by the time they come and meet with this group. And so you all are going to have to temper your expectations according to, you have some meetings that are going to come up as early as July. And when you have a strategic planning committee come in July, they may not have the full fact base already completed, whereas if somebody comes in November, they may have enough time to get the full fact base pulled together by that point. When they come and engage with the board, review and discuss the fact base and have a facilitated conversation so that you can actually really dig into what's actually happening on the ground and what kind of policy recommendations and high-level resource allocation recommendations this body wants to put forward. And then post the board meeting, that input would be synthesized and then pulled together into action plans. Some of those actions may be at a system level, but a lot of them will be at an institution level. And then, once you've done an initial meeting, then there's envisioned an annual check-in process where, again, prior to the board meeting, there would be homework and pre-reads distributed. And then during the board meeting, you'd have an opportunity to engage with the strategic planning committees to understand the progress against the action plans that have been put forward, how they're moving on key metrics that you've defined that are important to you on each of those dimensions. And so this becomes, the main thing that you drive in these meetings as opposed to a sideshow. And that's the primary point of this page, is just that as you look at a calendar, you can see that the bulk of the time would be devoted to strategic priorities, with operations and transactional items handled via an advanced phone call, a consent agenda format, and only things that have to be pulled out for discussion in this forum would be pulled out. But largely you would spend your time when gathered together on the things that you have said matter the most to you and matter the most to moving this great institution forward. So that's what I had to share with you today. Any questions about what I've shared or any of this? Okay. Thank you very much.